There are one or a few comments suggesting a video on either a tier list for weapons for each character and what's the best or second best for each one. The latter sounded better since not only it will save us time, me and you, the viewer, it also gives out alternatives instead of relying on ultimate weapons. Some characters have equally bad ultimates, both Soul Edge and legendaries. Side note, when I suggest one of their ultimate weapons as their best, I'll be quick about it. If you want to hear about what I have to say about them in detail, my other tier lists will fill you in. Starting with the Goku of the series, Mitsurugi. He has two best weapons. His number one is Damascus Sword, needless to say. But what if you want to be more merciful, or more importantly, being able to guard? Masamune is the lesser of two evils. It's still an awesome weapon. It's got a pretty good damage and defense buff. Soul Charge increases his speed but lowers defense. You don't really need Soul Charge unless if you really want that speed boost, which I assume most of you don't Soul Charge often. With or without Soul Charge is still a beast. Pretty busted for a regular weapon even though you get it later. A lot of Taki's weapons are mediocre, some weaken her defense. She's another character whose best weapon is her legendary. Her second best is ironically the first weapon that you buy for her. The Coniverse Kunai and Dead Ringer. Oh wait, wrong game. It's the Kunai. Despite the shorter reach, the damage and defense buff is plenty. Taki is a shorter range character to begin with. It's still noticeable, but not the worst. The damage is nuts, especially if you use BKBB. Need I remind you that it's her early game weapon? Like, Chapter 1 early? Then again, it may not have Kreese Soul Charge healing, but... Spy Taki! Both of Tom's ultimate weapons are solid. Soul Edge provides decent healing on hit and damage buff while Soul Calibur heals her and has a longer reach. But I never said either of them are her best weapons. Double Crescent Blade is yet another strong regular weapon that you get fairly early. Like the Kunai, it has buffed attack and defense but has shorter reach. It deals more damage through Soul Charge while losing some speed. As if Tom didn't deal enough damage to begin with. This is another weapon where Soul Charging is completely optional. You can get it fairly early in Weapon Master mode. Like I said, this is her best weapon to use. Sometimes you don't need healing. As for Cassandra, Valkyrie. My legendary weapon tier list already explained how it's one of the best weapons in the game. Like always, there is another option if you didn't unlock it or you don't want to use it. It wasn't easy finding a weapon that's as good as Valkyrie, but I managed to find a decent contender. No, not Ivan, he's terrible. Spine Blade isn't terrible. This is yet another shorter range weapon that also has a damage buff. This time it deals chip damage. I was debating either this or the Red Crystal Rod would be your second best weapon. Spine Blade has more benefits than a rod. Red Crystal Rod heals you over time, but B attacks break your A attacks easier. Spine Blade is a pretty good offensive weapon that's even good against Valkyrie, dealing more chip damage against the mirror match. Speaking of hard decisions, Yun Sung. I'm not the biggest fan of him and his selection of weapons doesn't help. Unlike the other three previously mentioned, Giant Butcher Knife only has a damage buff with reduced reach. No additional effects besides that. It's an option but not the best. Either his Soul Edge variation or Ramdar are his best weapon contenders. Ramdar is a lesser version but a little safer. Its life stealing and longer reach is decent enough. Taking counter and chip damage may sound scary, but not as harsh as Soul Edge's 50% chip damage risk. You get this one in the later chapters. Raphael has some good options. His best weapon is Queen's Guard. But if you don't want to take reflected damage, there are two other options. First is Woldao. The running Thingam's shorter range yet stronger damage buff continues. This time Soul Charging makes more moves unblockable. I know there are different levels of Soul Charge, but I want to explain things simpler. However, I prefer Raiter Palash. It deals more damage, although not as much as the former, and it's easier to break A attacks with B attacks. By the way, the description is a lie, it doesn't deal chip damage. Much better than relying on Soul Charge to add more unblockables. Both can be obtained fairly early in Weapon Master mode. Both of Kilik's ultimate weapons aren't good. One has a typical health loss over time and the other can't defend safely. It's even worse in the Japanese version. Instead of those, I recommend Kunlun Bamboo, the real one. It heals on each attack, but harder to break A's with your B's. At least it's safer than most of his weapons. As a matter of fact, it's his safest weapon to use. The healing combined with AB attacks keeps him alive. The smacking sound is also satisfying. Most of Kilik's weapons do more harm than good, so that's why I recommend using Kunlun Bamboo. This is another case of hard decisions when it comes to recommending weapons for Xianghua. Krita Yuga heals through Soul Charge while A attacks are harder to break with B attacks, you and your opponent. The amount of healing isn't bad. One of her throws initiates Soul Charge, so you know what that means. Blue Storm may have its defense nerfed, but it's made up by longer reach and more damage dealt. B break an A as well. It's the reverse card and safer to use than the evil Soul Calibur. Speaking of which, her last and best option is her variation of Soul Calibur. That's the only nice thing I'll ever say about it. Maxi also has risky weapons to use. Most of them have a longer reach but with different risks. Either they have sucky defense or harm him in some way. Fuzura is a better alternative and my recommendation for Maxi. It too has a longer range and it deals more damage. Its debuff? Guess what? Again! The range and damage buff is simple yet effective. All that flailing around without worrying about losing health or taking chip damage. Another good weapon to give him is Vajra. One unfortunate problem about it is that you can't guard. Yoshimitsu has a few good weapons for his arsenal. Katsune and Zetetskin have a noticeable damage buff. The first breaks the enemy's A's with B's, as for the latter, the other way around. Cast makes you take counter damage while Zant deals chip damage. Between the two, I would recommend Z more than K. It's got more helpful benefits. His best weapon is his Soul Edge variant despite not being able to guard. Still, Zant is a good early game option. Nightmare has plenty of good weapons to pick from. I still consider his Soul Calibur variant to be godlike. Oh my god, you've gotta be kidding me. But we're not here to talk about that. Steel Paddle is okay. Good defense buff and deals chip damage but takes reflected damage. Glam is better. It too deals chip damage, but it deals more base damage and you take counter damage. I'll always prefer not using self-harming weapons. They're still decent early game weapons. Soul Edge Growth is worth using more than the other two. It deals more damage than Glam and heals HP over time. The only downside is taking chip damage. Think of it as a lesser Valkyrie. You get it fairly late for a reason. Growth is stupidly strong, but not as much as his Soul Calibur. Both of Ivy's ultimate weapons are painful to use. Chain Flail can be good if you like getting double KOs. Jokes aside, my personal recommendation is Alarune. Viper Edge has a damage buff, but that's about it other than our little B versus A situation. Alarune has a damage and defense buff with the cost of taking chip damage. You get it later than Viper Edge. Even though it's not as damaging as the other, Alarune makes up for it for having more defense. For Savantis, just like Taki, his earliest weapon is his second best while Lethe is a better option. And like the Kunai, it's got a damage and defense buff despite having a shorter reach. It's safer than Lethe mainly because it doesn't hurt you when attacking. Their shorter range can be concerning, but you can get past it. This is another simple weapon that works well. And best of all, the pistol sword is still there. I had a hard time picking what's the best or some decent weapons for Sophitia. A lot of her weapons aren't too good. I still have some suggestions, one of them being Blue Crystal Rod. This Tower of Duraga reference weapon heals on attack and has a defense buff, plus more on Soul Charge. It unfortunately has a damage nerf. It's definitely a defensive weapon, but it makes you wish you could deal, some damage. Fireblade is another one. Longer reach and a damage buff. It can be a little too hot to handle when damaging someone though. Despite all of that, I still think her Soul Edge and even her legendary that I rated low are better than the other two. Astaroth also has a bunch of risky weapons. Great Maul and Nanbanfu are similar to each other. They deal more damage and break A's with B's. As you can see, the wooden hammer has shorter reach while the other axe takes chip damage instead. I would suggest Nanbanfu because of the higher damage. You'll still want that longer reach when you're playing as Astaroth. That was his second best weapon by the way. His number one is still Thanatos. Yet another hard decision to decide what's best or recommended weapons for our friend Valdo. Cat Claws is his earliest weapon to get. Another later option is Karma and Mara. Cat Claws deals plenty of damage. There's also Tafana Scissors, which also has the same damage buff, but I'd rather take counter damage over losing health over time. K&M raises defense, but it's harder to break A attacks with your B attacks. There's also his legendary weapon Guillotine, but I wouldn't recommend it over these two. This one is entirely up for you to decide which of these weapons are best for Valdo. Do you want more attack or more defense? Now for Sungmina, her Soul Edge variant is the best choice. Not in the mood for that? Well, luckily there's plenty of options for her. Half of her weapons have buff damage. Yep Dude buffs defense through Soul Charge but takes counter damage. RDK takes some chip damage. Halberd has a harsh defense nerf but heals 4 HP over time. Kaos doesn't have a damage buff but deals chip damage while having that B versus A problem for you. Lots of options for you this time. Do you want Oh my fucking god, are you serious? As I was saying, do you want... Alright. Do you want... No. No, 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 no. Yeah, I'm gonna leave this up to you. Necrid has more bad weapons than good ones. Out of everyone, this one's the hardest to choose. This is yet another pick your poison situation. Morphos, this one buffs attack and your A's are harder to break with B's, but takes counter damage. Ignis Fatuus raises defense and heals on attack, but lowers damage, just like Blue Crystal Rod without the Soul Charge buff. Both are obtained fairly early on Weapon Master Mode. This is another coin flip decision for you. Maybe you want the healing or you want to be a glass cannon. If you want to mess with the opponent, there's always chaos. As for the guest characters, let's start with Link. The Great Fairy Sword is an obvious choice for his best weapon, but as always, there are more options. Megaton Hammer is a better version of Razor Sword despite having lesser reach. At least you don't take chip damage and you'll win against the B versus A argument easier. Either way, Link might want a little more reach than those two. The Cane also has a pretty good defense buff and healing through Soul Charge. But the second place on his best are his Magic Sword and Shield. It deals a good amount of chip damage and retains the standard reach. However, both the Cane and Magic Gear suffer from being less effective at breaking A's with B's. As for Heihachi, I had a difficult time finding a good weapon for him. Gojo seems like it's okay with the counter and chip damage, but the defense nerf is too severe to overlook. One weapon that stands out for being a good option or best is Tenka Musou. It deals more damage plus more when charged, but it takes counter damage. It's a little safer than the damage nerf at least. Another option worth noting is his Soul Edge variation. Again, I've already said my piece about it on another video. You could also use Tekken, but the HP loss over time can be a buzzkill. Final character. Al Simmons has a variety of decent weapons to choose from. Despair deals chip damage and raises defense but takes counter damage. Misery is an improved version of Torment with both damage and defense buff while struggling against B attacks. Vengeance focuses on attack while adding more on Soul Charge, but takes chip damage. And Reaper has a longer reach and drains the enemy's health, yet it shares the same problem as Vengeance. As for his ultimate weapons, unless you like hurting yourself, his regular weapons are worth more using than them. My personal recommendations for Spawn are either Misery or Reaper. Now that everyone's been covered besides Team Jobber, let's wrap it up. Hopefully this video helps out either if you're starting from scratch in Weapon Master Mode, or coming back and you want to try out other weapons that aren't ultimate weapons. Got other suggestions? Lay it out in the comments below. The legend will never die. Unless you're up against Nightmare using Soul Calibur. Good luck.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more of my stuff, subscribe and hit the bell. Okay, thanks, bye.